Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, last week, a U.S. Army Apache helicopter went down off the coast of Oman. Within 2 hours, a rescue boat had located the pilots. But this was not an ordinary rescue boat, Mr. President. For the first time ever, an unmanned sea drone was sent to pick up the pilots and bring them to safety. Mr. President, from the battlefields of Ukraine to the conflict with Iran, drones and other unmanned systems have become the weapon of choice. Yet the United States military has been dangerously behind in drone and counter-drone capabilities. We've made considerable progress in just the last year, as evidenced by the rescue last week, but we still have more work to do. That's where the National Defense Authorization Act comes in. Mr. President, I often say that if we don't get national security right, the rest is just conversation. And this annual defense bill is one of the most important bills we consider each year because it's where we make the policies that help ensure we do get national security right. We pass this bill every year so that these policies are up to date, so that we're giving our men and women in uniform the very best equipment and capabilities to do the job we ask them to do. Mr. President, last week the Armed Services Committee reported out the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2027. And I'm proud to say that this bill authorizes important investments to improve readiness and to provide the capabilities that we need to keep America safe today and into the future. And that includes a heavy focus on unmanned systems. This bill would create a new combatant command overseeing these technologies. It authorizes $1 billion in unmanned maritime systems, supports drone and counter-drone capabilities at military bases and at America's borders, and will ensure that we are able to produce and procure enough munitions for all of these systems as well. And drones, Mr. President, are just the beginning. There's a lot more in this year's NDAA to strengthen America's military, improve readiness, and keep our armed services on the cutting edge. One of those things is shipbuilding. The bill reported out of committee authorizes investment in a number of new ships, including accelerating procurement of amphibious warfare ships and supporting domestic shipbuilding and repair capabilities. As for our air power, this year's bill will help ensure we maintain a force of at least 1,800 fighters. It supports the new B-21 long-range strategic bomber, which is expected to land at Ellsworth Air Force Base in my home state sometime next year. And it allows for multi-year procurement for fighter planes, which will allow the Pentagon to do business more efficiently with greater predictability and save taxpayers money. Mr. President, this year's bill builds on the significant reforms to defense acquisition we enacted in last year's NDAA in a number of ways. As I mentioned, it allows for multi-year procurement contracts for fighter aircraft as well as for munitions and vehicles, and it accelerates the process for new software to come online, removing unnecessary red tape that delays getting new technology into the hands of the American soldiers. And speaking of our men and women in uniform, Mr. President, I'm pleased to be able to say that this bill authorizes a 3.6% pay raise for our military members. It also supports a number of quality of life improvements, including investments in education, health care, and child care for service members and their families. Mr. President, as I've already said, this is an important bill, and drafting a bill of this size is not a simple task. I appreciate the hard work by our colleagues on the Armed Services Committee. Thanks to the leadership of Chairman Wicker and Ranking Member Reed, we have, for the 66th year now in a row, a bipartisan National Defense Authorization Act. That, too, is no small feat. Mr. President, when it comes to military capabilities, we just can't play catch-up. We need to be the leader in the capabilities that will define the future. Capabilities that will keep Americans safe by making our enemies think twice before crossing us. That's peace through strength. But you can't get there with a strong budget one year and a weak budget the next. We ask members of the armed forces to be ready whenever we need them, wherever we need them, and for whatever we need them to do. And we here have an obligation to make sure that when that call comes, they have what they need to answer it. Mr. President, we need to make every concerted effort every year to strengthen our military. There's never a time when we can afford to put this on the back burner. Try as we might, we simply don't know what's coming over the horizon. And we'll eventually pay the price for failing to invest in a strong national defense today. Mr. President, 251 years ago this week, the Continental Congress created the Continental Army and appointed George Washington its commander-in-chief. For 251 years, Americans have bravely gone to fight our nation's battles. And for 251 years, it's been Congress's job to stand behind them and provide what they need to execute the mission. The face of the battle has changed, but the fundamental duty, theirs and ours, has not. As Washington himself said, and I quote, "If we desire to avoid insult, we must be able to repel it. If we desire to secure peace, it must be known that we are at all times ready for war," end quote. Mr. President, we have to get national security right. I'm glad this year's National Defense Authorization Act is up to the task, and I look forward to bringing it to the floor very soon. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
Mr. President,
The Democratic leader.
Mr. President, Trump's actions last night make it clear. We're in a
Senate's in a
quorum.
quorum call.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dismissed.
Without objection.
Mr. President, Trump's actions last night make it crystal clear that he is the one standing in the way of FISA. It was already clear that Trump was the one blocking FISA, but the fact that he withdrew Jay Clayton should erase anyone's doubts. Trump wants FISA to stay expired. Trump is twisting himself up in knots and jumping through hoops to make it impossible to reauthorize FISA right now, and he is embarrassing his Republican colleagues in the process. Trump can blame Democrats all he wants, but no one is going to believe him. Trump just got caught red-handed undermining America's national security. Withdrawing Clayton even shocked Trump's closest Republican allies. Trump also reasserted his demand to tie FISA to his radical SAVE Act, which would strip millions of Americans of their voting rights and resurrect the ghost of the Jim Crow South. Trump is just so off base and should get it out of his mind that he can save by attaching it to FISA. It ain't happening. It ain't passing. The SAVE Act is perhaps the most vicious piece of anti-voting rights legislation Trump has ever come up with, and it has absolutely nothing to do with FISA whatsoever. So, every time Republicans find a path to negotiate on FISA, Trump slams the shut door on them. Every time the Republicans find a path to negotiate FISA, Trump slams the door shut on them. And you can hear the howls. Trump's taking America's national security hostage to serve his own personal interests. This is Trump's hostage note. Here's what he said. I will not approve FISA. He said, we are canceling the Senate hearing. He said, Bill Pulte will remain as the acting director of national intelligence. Trump should know national security is not a pawn. It is not a pawn, and yet it is clear that he is holding our national security hostage, and it is absolutely disgraceful. Trump is gleeful about undermining national security and leaving America vulnerable, saying it is simply to add a slight bit of intrigue when American safety is at stake in a dangerous world with dangerous countries, and he says he's adding a slight bit of intrigue? Are you kidding me? Intrigue when it comes to America's national security? Intrigue when it comes to the safety of our people? Trump ought to add a slight bit of common sense as he does this. But again, just to repeat what he said, quote, I will not approve FISA. We are canceling the Senate hearing. Bill Pulte will remain as the acting director of national intelligence. All three sentences show that Trump is making national security a pawn to his own political and off-base interests. There can be no other explanation for the choices Trump is making and his insistence on having a political hack like Bill Pulte serve atop our Intelligence Committee, other than he plans to order Pulte to abuse his powers as Director of National Intelligence. The question for oversight now is what exactly will Trump ask Pulte to do? Expose intelligence sources, alter analysis, target political opponents, mess with elections? Pulte has shown that he knows no limits and will do whatever Trump asks, legal or not, ethical or not, in American people's interests or not. Make no mistake, all of the consequences that come from undercutting our national security will fall on Trump and any Republicans who go along with his dangerous partisan games. There's a lot going on this morning, and I want to speak about Iran. We've been told dozens of times that this war is over, and dozens of times we've been disappointed. 3 days after Trump announced his so-called understanding with Iran, the American people still have no understanding of what it actually is because Trump refuses to tell us. Now, more than ever, the administration must come clean and let people actually know what's in the so-called understanding, because when details start to leak in the press, it only adds to the confusion. The administration still hasn't released the text officially and continues to send mixed messages about what the so-called understanding and future negotiations entail. One administration official told CNN people shouldn't read too much into the language of the Memorandum of Understanding. Can you believe it? There's something out there, and they say don't believe it, but they won't tell us what it is. The American people have a right to know what it is. The Congress has a right to know what it is. And they said, another administration official, what's more important than the actual document, he said, is the understandings we have with each other. What are they? We need to know. It is just outrageous that the administration is now saying that whatever's in the MOU is not the real agreement. This is foreign policy by clown car, except it's dangerous. The Trump administration insists that this understanding will bring peace, but they refuse to release the text officially and then say we shouldn't give the memo too much weight because there are secret side negotiations that are more important. How deceptive, how nasty, how dangerous for the American people. I call on Trump to brief Congress, release the official text of the so-called understanding to the public, and disclose any secret deals to the American people immediately. If there are secret side deals, we ought to know about them. American people have a right to know about them in this dangerous world. So why is the administration deliberately deceiving the American people by saying, well, what's in this agreement, or what at least been published in this agreement, is not true? The administration is deliberately deceiving the American people because they're afraid it will show that Trump has capitulated and been taken advantage of, that Iran has gotten the better of this deal because Trump didn't know what his goals were when he began it and kept going back and forth about what it should be, what it is, what is happening. So I say to Donald Trump, stop keeping the American people in the dark. Your actions, President Trump, leave Americans wondering, are our troops safe? What are you promising to Iran? How much longer will gas prices continue to skyrocket? Americans want to know, what has Trump's war gotten them? What was this whole blunder for? By every measure, Trump's disastrous war has left America worse off. No wonder they don't want to release the real details. Trump's probably embarrassed. Iran has more control over the Strait of Hormuz than before Trump's war. The Iranian regime is more radical, more extreme, more hard-line than before the war. Gas prices are dramatically higher than they were before the war. Americans need to know when this war will end, not in Trump's imagination, not in some document that they discredit, but in real life. Donald Trump, reveal the deal, stop hiding any secret negotiations, and end this war now. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.
President. Majority Whip.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without
I
objection.
also ask unanimous consent to waive the mandatory quorum call with respect to the Steele and Holding nominations.
Without objection.
Mr. President, wildfire season is officially here. Across the West, wildfires are devastating many communities, and this certainly includes my home state of Wyoming. The past 2 wildfire seasons were some of the most destructive that Wyoming has seen in decades. The drought we're experiencing makes conditions this year especially concerning. As summer continues, rural communities are bracing for another devastating wildfire season. America is in a wildfire crisis, and the crisis isn't going to be one that will solve itself. Our federal forests are in dire need of effective management. The federal government must manage our nation's forests in a serious way and a credible way. And for too long, the federal government has ignored forest management. And this approach has failed to keep communities safe. Today, tens of millions of acres of federal land are at severe risk of wildfires. Overgrown forests have become a tinderbox for large fires. Wildfires threaten our homes, our air quality, our watersheds, and our wildlife. Without proper forest management, we are going to continue to see costly and deadly wildfires. We know that active forest management works. This includes thinning of overgrown forests, it includes using prescribed fires, it includes grazing, and all of these are tools that measurably reduce the risk of wildfires. Wyoming has led the way. We have shown that when you treat more acres and work with local partners, you get healthier forests and safer communities. The rest of the country should follow our example. At the federal level, we have seen the Trump administration rightly return to forest management policies that work. Still, federal agencies need help. That's exactly why I've introduced the Wildfire Prevention Act. The Wildfire Prevention Act is going to reduce the risk of wildfires in our communities. At the same time, it's going to restore the health on our federal lands in Wyoming and across the Rocky Mountain West. My bill is a pro-first responder piece of legislation. Our nation's wildland firefighters risk their lives to protect our forests and our communities from these wildfires. Hotshot crews are our heroes in Wyoming. They're highly trained, highly specialized, and their courage and ability keep us safe. My bill gives them the tools and the support that they need to better prevent wildfires and also to fight them more effectively. My bill also gives federal agencies the clear direction that they currently lack to manage our forests properly. Now, this is good for humans and it's good for wildlife. Our proactive measures are designed to prevent wildfires. This bill will set real standards to increase thinning, prescribed burns, tree removal, as well as grazing. It allows agencies to sell more timber. It will cut unnecessary red tape and streamline management. These are basic bipartisan protections. Every responsible landowner follows them. We should expect nothing less from the federal government. It's also important for Washington, D.C. to collaborate effectively with states to prevent fires before they happen. That's why my bill includes an important update to codify the repeal of the so-called roadless rule. The roadless rule was put into place 25 years ago. It was put in place by President Bill Clinton. It's been called a midnight regulation because it was done in January of 2021. Clinton did it in the final week after serving 8 years as president. Waited till the very end, and then he was on out the door, said, hey, let's put this into place. The roadless rule remains a one-size-fits-all Washington restriction that obstructs responsible forest management on a state-by-state basis. I've opposed the Clinton roadless rule from day one. The Trump administration rightly repealed it. My bill makes the repeal permanent. At the same time, it protects the rights of each state to set its own rules. That is the right approach. It's the responsible approach. It's going to promote public access, wildlife health, as well as smart management. Local control and local conditions should drive forest management decisions. We can't allow a Washington mandate imposed on states a quarter of a century ago to continue to undermine our abilities to manage our forests. Republicans and Democrats have talked about the need for better forest management. We've talked about it for years. Both parties know we need to do better. The Wildfire Prevention Act builds on what works. It gives federal agencies the tools they need to succeed. Our shared forests and our local communities, Mr. President, deserve nothing less. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Senator of Illinois.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the following law clerks to the Senate Judiciary Committee be granted floor privileges until August 1st, 2026. Mark Maddock, Sidney Rogers, Zaria Chapman, Nicholas Talley, and Margaret Stern.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, remember when President Trump announced he would end the war in Ukraine on his first day in office? Instead, over a year and a half later, President Trump and Vice President Vance have publicly humiliated Ukrainian President Zelensky and made embarrassing friendly overtures to the man who attacked his country, who attacked Ukraine, Russian President Putin. It's hard to understand. Mr. Putin's response has been to thumb his nose at the United States and any efforts toward peace. In fact, in recent months, Putin has launched some of the deadliest attacks on civilian targets since the Ukrainian war began. This invasion by the Russians of Ukraine has now lasted longer than World War I. Let me repeat that. This invasion of Ukraine by the Russians and Vladimir Putin has now led to a conflict that has lasted longer than World War I. On Monday, Russia fired a barrage of missiles at several major Ukrainian cities, killing at least 11 people and sparking a massive fire at one of the most important Orthodox monasteries, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And Russia has continued its acts of sabotage and provocation throughout NATO and Europe, not to mention its supplying of targeting information to Iran to hit U.S. interests in the region. Imagine my surprise that amid all of these Russian attacks on Ukraine and neighboring countries, the Trump administration sent a U.S. official to Putin's annual economic conference earlier this month in St. Petersburg, Russia. We had an official delegation to Putin's economic development conference for Russia while we are trying to stop them from attacking Ukraine and other countries. This annual event, we had a U.S. chairman of the Commission of Fine Arts representing the United States. His name is Rodney Mems Cook, Jr. He was at the event with President Putin in St. Petersburg to talk about economic development in Russia. And yet, you may recall, Mr. Cook is beneficially helping President Trump with his grandiose ballroom and arch projects. Why would President Trump give any U.S. legitimacy to this Russia propaganda event while Putin continues to bomb Ukraine and snub efforts to end the war? Why would President Trump proceed with recently reported plans to significantly reduce air and naval assets available for NATO operations in Europe while Putin continues this mayhem? On Tuesday, President Trump went as far as to signal that the war in Ukraine was not a priority of the United States. President Trump told reporters at the G7 summit, and I quote, "We had nothing to do," close quote, "with a war that was, quote, thousands of miles away." I could not disagree more. It is long overdue that the Pentagon spend the $400 million in Ukraine assistance appropriated by Congress and signed into law by the President, and the $200 million in Baltic security funds as Congress passed several months ago. I raised the point that we had appropriated these funds officially, signed by President Trump, at a recent hearing with Secretary Excerpt and Secretary Rubio. They indicated to me the funds were just getting ready any day now to be moved, which I hope is correct, as these should have been sent long ago and not delayed any further. It also is long overdue for this chamber to act on Russia and Ukraine-related legislation. A few weeks ago, the House of Representatives overwhelmingly, on a bipartisan basis, passed a bill to provide additional security aid to Ukraine and tighten sanctions on Russia. That is exactly what is needed to force Russia to finally negotiate a peace and stop this attack on Ukraine and its people. And here in the Senate, we have a broad, bipartisan Russian sanctions bill that's been pending for months without action. So while we send the President's ballroom representative to represent the United States of America in St. Petersburg, Russia, and talk about Putin's plans for rebuilding Russia's economy, while that is going on, Russia is attacking the Ukrainians and neighboring countries, and the United States, through the President, has announced that's none of our business. Mr. President, on a separate topic, last week, Bureau of Labor Statistics reported and confirmed what Americans already knew. Inflation is at a 3-year high, marking the second straight month inflation outpaced wage growth. Rising energy costs are crushing American families, and their dollar simply doesn't stretch as far anymore. It's a lose-lose scenario. In a birthday present to the President, NBC News polling revealed the President's approval rating hit an all-time low for his second term. It's no wonder why. In my home state of Illinois, the average household has had to spend $3,400 more on goods and services during President Trump's second term, despite the President's campaign pledge to lower costs on day one. Another broken promise. That's according to a new report released by the Joint Economic Committee. That same report also details what Illinois families have spent. While President's second term has transpired, Illinois families on average spent $815 more than in the previous similar period on housing costs, rent, mortgage payments, and the like. $310 more for groceries in the President Trump's first year compared to 2024, and more than $350 more on gasoline since the start of the Iran war a little over 100 days ago. What was the President's official response? And I quote, "I love the inflation," the President said. During the vote-a-rama earlier this month on the President's mass deportation funding bill, Senate Democrats offered numerous amendments to address this affordability crisis, which the President barely acknowledges. Senate Democrats offered a proposal that will fund the largest federal grant program to create more affordable housing. We put forth a measure that would investigate health insurance companies that are denying patients the care they need. And we gave Republicans a chance to join us in ending for good the President's anti-weaponization slush fund of taxpayer dollars to cop beaters of January 6th. At all these opportunities, too many Republicans refused to join us. When will the Republican Party join the Democrats in the Senate to provide relief to struggling families in their own home states? Only time will tell. Senate Democrats will continue to put forward legislation to help families with rising costs of gasoline, groceries, housing, child and health care. We will put Republicans on the record. I hope they'll join us in a bipartisan effort to give American families real relief. And I yield the floor.
Senator of Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today to speak about the United States military and its role as an apolitical institution. For 250 years, our military's most important source of strength has been the trust of the American people. Their trust is hard-won and relies upon the belief that our military remains above politics. I fear that trust is being eroded by the current Secretary of Defense. I want to begin with Dwight Eisenhower. This month marks the 82nd anniversary of D-Day and the American invasion at Normandy. General Eisenhower spent the night before those landings walking among the men he was sending into battle, asking where they were from, what they did back home, how was their families. He wrote 2 messages after those meetings. The rallying call for the soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force was one of his messages. But a second message, a message he hoped no one would ever read, was written in case the landings failed. It read, "If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone." Fortunately, he never had to send it. But he wrote it because he understood that the privilege of command carries the full weight of its consequences. In 1947, Eisenhower addressed the graduating class at West Point. He had just finished commanding the largest military campaign in human history and witnessed the deaths of hundreds of thousands of young Americans. He knew what war was, and this is what he told the cadets. "War is mankind's most tragic and stupid folly." 15 years later, General Douglas MacArthur, no stranger to war himself, again stood at West Point and said, "The soldier above all other people prays for peace." Those commanders understood that lethality is a terrible tool and humility is paramount in warfare. Last weekend, Pete Hegseth traveled to Normandy to observe the D-Day anniversary. He stood at the American Cemetery above the beaches where more than 2,500 Americans died in a single morning. Standing on that sacred historic site, Secretary Hegseth did not use his platform to express humility or unity, but to preach an anti-immigrant message. He said, "Sadly, today, different European beaches are stormed by different dangerous ideologies. Beaches in Spain, Italy, Greece, and Bulgaria, boats and men arrive. When will European capitals do something about that invasion?" Well, many historians and veterans, hearing his words, called his speech grotesque. I would call it a desecration, and an ignorant one also. I doubt the Secretary knows that during World War II, more than 300,000 foreign-born individuals served in the United States Army alone. More than 109,000 of them were not even American citizens. They were men and women who crossed an ocean to fight and die for a country that had not yet fully claimed them and who earned their citizenship through their service. Hundreds of thousands more were first-generation Americans, the children of immigrants. For example, U.S. Navy coxswain Amin Isbir, the son of Syrian immigrants who settled in Pittsburgh, was among the first men off his landing craft when it reached Omaha Beach under heavy fire. After securing his landing craft on the beach, he was killed by a German shell while helping load a fellow wounded soldier onto a stretcher. Coxswain Isbir and countless heroes like him are buried at Normandy, the sons and daughters of immigrants or immigrants themselves. Yet Secretary Hegseth stood above their graves and used the moment to deride the kind of people they were. Last month, Secretary Hegseth got his own chance to address West Point cadets at their commencement, where Eisenhower and MacArthur spoke of wisdom, humility, and caution. Pete Hegseth boasted about lethality, claimed that West Point had turned into woke Princeton, and made such bluster as, You can't throw your pronouns at the enemy. He told the class of 2026, the most diverse class in the history of the United States Military Academy, that strength in diversity is, quote, the single dumbest phrase in military history. He mocked the service of women officers and criticized those with non-conservative political beliefs. He told a captive audience of newly commissioned officers that the presence of their classmate with different beliefs and demographics represented a lowering of standards. It was a shameful, divisive, and self-centered speech. Mr. President, I attended West Point as a cadet. I taught there as a professor. I served on active duty as an Army officer. I hope I know what West Point stands for and what its graduates embrace. Principled leadership to serve their soldiers and the nation. Where past leaders asked West Point cadets to understand the economic, political, and spiritual aspirations of other peoples, to devote their lives as seriously to leading towards peace as preparing for war, Hegseth gave them a culture war speech. Indeed, as James Bennett observed in The Economist, where past military leaders treated violence as a tragic necessity, Hegseth celebrated as a righteous and thrilling. His hyper-partisan remarks were both morally and factually wrong. But, Mr. President, this was not an isolated incident. It is a part of a pattern of partisan political behavior antithetical to the role of the Secretary of Defense. Last month, Secretary Hegseth traveled to Kentucky to campaign for a Republican House candidate the day before a primary election. He stood on a stage, attacked a sitting Republican member of Congress, and told the crowd to send a different person to Washington. He announced a disclaimer, apparently, quote, for the lawyers, that he was there in his personal capacity. That disclaimer is void. The Secretary of Defense does not have a personal capacity. He represents at every moment this nation and its military forces. Indeed, this trip seems to violate the Defense Department's own political activity rules, which expressly prohibit Senate-confirmed officials from taking an active part in political campaigns. The department rules are explicit. Even making speeches or knocking doors constitutes a prohibited political act for someone in Hegseth's position. Pete Hegseth arrived in Kentucky as a civilian leader of the most powerful military on earth, in the middle of an active war. The secretary travels with him. He can't leave it at the office. The authority of the office travels with him. And every service member watching the news understood exactly what they were seeing. The man who controls their careers, their promotions, and their deployments, inserting himself into a partisan election on behalf of the president's favorite candidate. This was an abuse of office and created an image that every Secretary of Defense, in my memory, has worked to avoid. The Kentucky party's own former spokesperson questioned whether Secretary Hegseth violated the Hatch Act, and numerous independent groups have filed complaints with the Pentagon's Inspector General. Mr. President, this isn't about my opposition to the Secretary or the President Trump. I'm driven by the corrosive impacts of his rhetoric, his actions, and what they mean for the strength of our volunteer military. We need to think about what this means for the men and women in uniform who serve under this secretary. They took an oath to the Constitution, not to a political party, not to a candidate, not to a president. The Uniform Code of Military Justice restricts their partisan activity precisely because we have always understood that a politicized military is a dangerous military. And now our service members are watching their Secretary of Defense do what they are forbidden to do. What message does that send? What chilling effect does it have on good order and discipline throughout the ranks? Secretary Hegseth has personally intervened in the careers of nearly 50 senior officers we know of, firing them or blocking their promotions without explanation. Just last month, we learned he has personally blocked and delayed the promotions of dozens of top-performing Navy and Air Force officers, the majority of whom are women and minority officers. These are leaders selected by their peers based on merit and performance in a promotion system that has functioned on those principles for generations. The chilling effect is real. Senior officers across the force are asking themselves whether their professional military advice, the kind that keeps soldiers alive, will cost them their careers. And this is not hypothetical. We've already seen it happen. General Cruz, the former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, was fired last year after his analysts produced an intelligence report that contradicted the Secretary's public claims about Iran. The message was received by those advising him, and here we are today, more than 100 days into a war with Iran. I would also note that under United States law, only the President may remove an officer from a promotion list. Secretary Hegseth has refused to explain why or how he believes he has the authority to terminate or delay these officers' careers. And of course, there is the Kid Rock incident. In March, 2 Army Apache helicopters flew to the Nashville home of Kid Rock, a well-known Trump supporter, and hovered over his pool while he filmed them for social media. This was an obvious violation of military protocol and aviation safety laws, and the Army immediately launched an investigation and suspended the crews. But within hours, Secretary Hegseth intervened. He posted on social media, quote, "No punishment, no investigation, carry on, patriots." The Army's chain of command was overruled by a tweet because the man being entertained was a friend of the President. Secretary Hegseth later doubled down by taking Kid Rock for a ride in an Army Apache helicopter as part of a promotional video. Mr. President, the Army's aviation safety regulations exist for a reason. The chain of command exists for a reason. It ensures commanders hold each other and their troops accountable, that those who break regulations face consequences, and that military assets are used for legitimate operational needs, not political theater. When the Secretary of Defense short-circuits good order and discipline to benefit a political ally, he does not just bend the rules. He signals to every officer that accountability is conditional on politics. These actions are emblematic of the Secretary's broader focus on his own personal agenda. In the past 3 months alone, while our service members have been fighting and dying overseas, he has taken it upon himself to cancel flu vaccine requirements, repeal firearm restrictions on military posts, bar service members from attending certain universities, and upend the chaplain corps. My point is this. Secretary Hegseth is behaving as though his time as Defense Secretary is an opportunity to impose his personal political views on our military men and women. He is wrong. The Office of Secretary of Defense is about leading millions of American service members of every faith, race, and gender with the character and composure they deserve. The military's apolitical mission is not incidental to its strength. It is foundational to its strength. When the Secretary of Defense uses his office to promote a sectarian vision of his culture war, he does not inspire the force, he divides it. Taken together, the Secretary's actions are an assault on the norms, traditions, and structures that have kept the American military the most trusted institution in this country for 250 years. Good order and discipline is not a slogan. It means that the rules apply to everyone, including the leaders at the top. It means that accountability flows both ways, and that promotions are based on merit, not loyalty to a party. And it means that service members of every faith and background are welcomed and respected. Secretary Hegseth is undermining every one of those tenets. Our service members deserve better, and we have an obligation as a body, this Senate, to say so plainly and to counter this abuse of power. With that, I yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.
Mr. President,
Minority Leader.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, this is one happy moment. It's an honor to offer this resolution with Senator Gillibrand to pay tribute to the great New York Knicks. With their historic victory in the NBA Finals, the Knicks reminded the country and the world it's never a good idea to bet against New York. We just witnessed perhaps the greatest playoff runoff in history. We just witnessed the greatest playoff run in history and finals series in history as well. Coming off the second longest playoff win streak in the NBA history, the Knicks achieved the first, fourth, and sixth biggest comeback wins in the history of the NBA Finals. And they did it all in a single series. Absolutely extraordinary. Coming off that second longest playoff win streak in NBA history, we're so proud, so proud of our New York Knicks. This team has joined the ranks of DeBusschere and Bradley, of Willis Reed, Earl of Pearl and Clyde, and the rest of the 1973 legendary Knicks who last brought a title home. I admired that team as a young man, and we've been waiting and waiting and waiting, and here we are again. And for their efforts, this championship team will be honored tomorrow with what many are expecting to be the largest ticker tape parade in New York history. In fact, the Knicks' victory goes beyond the team itself. It brings such honor, such pride, such joy to New York, and has united our diverse city in a way that maybe nothing else could. It's truly an honor to introduce and pass this resolution to congratulate the Knicks for winning the championship and to thank them for the dedication they showed to our city both on and off the court throughout the season. I speak for the Senate, perhaps with the exception of one or two Spurs fans, when I say, let's go Knicks. I yield the floor. So, as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of SRES 771, congratulating the Knicks, which was submitted earlier today.
Clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 771, congratulating the New York Knicks on winning the 2026 National Basketball Association Finals.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
Go Knicks!